Jury deliberations in the trial for the death of Manuel-Ellis are expected to begin this week. Prosecutors began delivering their closing arguments late this afternoon. So joining us to discuss are legal analysts, former Pierce County Prosecuting Attorney Mark Lindquist and retired Judge Brian Tollefson, who served for decades as a Superior Court judge. Our thanks to both of you for being here. In court this morning, we heard a lot about jury instructions. So, Judge, I'm going to start with you. Break down for us, what was that all about this morning?
So jury instructions are given in every jury trial case. And the purpose of jury instructions is to help explain to the jury what the relevant facts are and to describe or explain for the jury the process for reaching a jury verdict and, of course, how to declare their verdict in the case.
There was a lot of talk about what should be included in those instructions, what should not be included in those instructions. What do you make of that, Mark?
Well, I think the lawyers pay a lot more attention to the jury instructions than the jurors actually do. The jury instructions matter, but jurors, in my experience, tend not to get too bogged down in the legalese. They're going to do what they think is right and just, and they'll find a way to read the instructions in a way that allows them to do that.
Mark, one of the attorneys asked that there be limits placed on the state's closing arguments. Will that be allowed, and what was the point of that? Is that unusual?
You mean limits in terms of the arguments they make?
Right.
That's not unusual. I think judges, and this judge in particular, tend to let both sides argue their theories of the case. I don't think that was necessary, and I don't think the judge really cut any of the prosecutor's arguments. As
those closing arguments began, what did you make of what you heard today in court, Mark?
Well, I'll start by saying that closing arguments, I think, are more important in a long trial like this than in a run-of-the-mill trial, because it's been 9 or 10 weeks since we heard from the first witnesses. Since then, there's been a lot of testimony. There have been a lot of experts, some of whom contradicted each other. And I can tell you the jurors are really, at this point, ready to hear closing arguments. And you've got their attention when you start. I was a little surprised the prosecutor squandered the first few seconds with formalities like "may it please the court" and "ladies and gentlemen of the jury," but then pretty quickly got right to the theme, which is "I can't breathe."
And the other theme was what I predicted the jurors are going to pay attention to, and that is the eyewitness testimony and the videos. And Ms. Eakes, the prosecuting attorney who was doing the closing arguments, focused right away on those videos and on the eyewitness testimony. And she emphasized it more than once, by the way.
She did, indeed. And how important do you think that witness testimony is going to be? Not just the videotapes, but also the testimony from the officers that we heard last week. How crucial is that testimony going to be as they deliberate?
Yeah, I think credibility is key. How the jury perceives all the witnesses and whether they think they're credible, and weighing the value of each one of those credible statements.
Your thoughts?
I think the video is a lot more powerful than the civilian witnesses for the state. The video does not look good for the officers. On the other hand, the video doesn't capture the beginning of the incident, which brings us to the next point, which is how critical it is that the officers testified, or that 2 of them did. And I think their testimony, more than anything else, is what this case rests upon, because jurors want to hear from those officers. They want to know what's in their hearts, what's in their head. They want to hear why they used the force that they used.
And so you think that their decision is going to weigh more heavily on the officer's testimony than the videotape? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think the officer's testimony is more important than any of the civilian witnesses that we heard from the state. I think the video evidence is the only thing that's roughly equivalent to the officer's testimony.
But you agree that the officer's testimony was crucial last week?
Oh, they had to testify. I agree with Mark on that. They had to testify, so.
So we are almost out of time, but I just have to ask, what do you think comes next? And at the end of the day, this case will rest on what specifically in your minds?
Well, from a judicial standpoint, of course, the case is going to rest on the jury instructions given by the judge and the facts that the jury finds. But from a philosophical standpoint, this case is going to rest on the collective attitudes of the jurors, their collective life experiences, and their collective attitudes towards community safety and police and policing.
It's far too early, but I'm wondering how you think it's going to go.
How I think it's going to go? I think you're very likely to see a hung jury here. And by the way, I think when they first come back hung, the judge will say, no, go back and try harder.
Why a hung jury?
Because the evidence is not as strong as a prosecutor would have liked. All the defense has to do is raise reasonable doubt, And I think we're going to hear in the defense closing arguments, they've got a few sharp points to make that could raise reasonable doubt with some of the jurors. And again, keep in mind, they don't have to raise reasonable doubt with all the jurors, but with just some of the jurors, or perhaps even one. Though I think if it's just one, the other 11 will take care of that before they're done deliberating.
In the days ahead, we'll talk more about reasonable doubt, even with the videotape and where that reasonable doubt plays in. That is tomorrow or the next day. Our thanks to both of you always. We really appreciate your analysis on this. And we want all of you to stay with King 5 for complete coverage of this trial. We'll bring you live coverage here on air and on king5.com. As soon as that verdict is announced, we will have it for you. So we hope you'll stay with us.